You've certainly heard of the relentless speed of George Patton's Third Army after D-Day, an armored offensive that seemed like lightning cutting through France. But have you ever stopped to think about what fueled that lightning? How, in a country with destroyed railways and unusable ports, thousands of tanks and trucks continued to advance day after day? You sense this gap in history, the feeling that the most important piece of the puzzle is missing, the one that explains how 12,500 tons of supplies magically appeared on the front lines every day. This curiosity consumes you because easy answers aren't enough. You read about Patton, about Sherman tanks, but logistics are treated as a footnote. Yet you know that logistics is everything. The pain of not understanding this feat is real, the frustration of seeing only the tip of the spear, never knowing the incredible force that drove it. How could 6,000 trucks do the work of an entire rail system that no longer exists? It seems impossible, insane. The title of this video mentions a crazy train and the idea of a trucker. That's the key. It wasn't just an act of brute force, but an act of desperate genius, a system so audacious it bordered on the absurd. It was an idea that turned ordinary truckers into heroes and ordinary trucks into lifesavers. You're here because you want to understand this madness. You want to know who came up with this idea and how, exactly, it worked against all odds. For today, your search ends. We'll delve deep into the untold story of World War II's greatest logistical feat. We'll dissect the system, meet the men, analyze the machines, and understand how this seemingly impossible operation not only worked but saved the Allied offensive in Europe. This is the true story of how the ingenuity and sheer courage of thousands of men fueled Patton's war machine, 1 ton at a time. If you are fascinated by the engineering, strategy, and courage that defined the 20th century, this channel was made for you, so subscribe now so you don't miss any military innovation stories. Click the button and join our community of history enthusiasts. The night of August 27, 1944, is thick with exhaust near Chartres, France. The air vibrates with the deep roar of hundreds of engines. Private William Perry of the 783rd Truck Company grips the steering wheel of his GMC-CCKW, the deuce and a half. His eyes sting, red from dust and lack of sleep. He has been driving for nearly 20 hours, and the darkness of the road ahead is broken only by the tiny position lights of the truck he follows. He's part of an endless river of steel, a convoy stretching for miles in both directions. But he can't see it. The rules are clear. Maintain 40 kilometers per hour, 60 meters of distance from the vehicle in front, and above all, don't stop for anything. Stopping means breaking the chain, meaning a Sherman tank somewhere ahead will run out of fuel or ammunition. The occasional whiz of a German sniper shot hidden in the nearby woods is a reminder that this is no ordinary delivery. This was the lifeblood of the Allied Army, an operation codenamed Red Ball Express. Patton's advance after Operation Cobra was so rapid, so successful, that he literally outstripped his supply lines. With French ports like Cherbourg destroyed and the railways systematically sabotaged, the Allies faced a logistical disaster. The victory in Paris was celebrated, but Patton's tanks were stalling for lack of fuel, sometimes less than 100 miles from the beaches of Normandy. The situation was desperate. General Eisenhower and his planners at Communications Command, or COMZ, needed a radical solution. Airlift was insufficient and fuel-intensive. The answer came from a team of logisticians, including Colonel Loren Little Patton Ayers, who proposed a crazy idea: dedicate entire highways, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week exclusively to a supply train. The name Red Ball was taken from American railroad slang meaning priority freight. The plan was activated on August 25, 1944. 2 main routes were selected: a northern route from St. Lay toward the front near Chartres for loaded traffic, and a parallel southern route for empty trucks to return. It was a gigantic closed circuit, a one-way highway for the war, where no unauthorized civilian or military traffic was permitted. The scale was breathtaking. At its peak, the Red Ball Express operated with 5,958 vehicles, delivering an average of 8 to 10,000 tons of supplies per day, with the peak of 12,500 tons mentioned in the title being reached on August 29th. For context, that's the weight of 25,000 grand pianos delivered daily. The vast majority of this cargo, about 70%, was gasoline, oil, and lubricants, followed by ammunition. But who were the truck drivers behind this feat? The title suggests the importance of the individual, and this is crucial. About 75% of the Red Ball Express's drivers and support personnel were African American soldiers. In a still rigidly segregated army, units like the 761st Tank Battalion, which would later gain fame, were stripped of their men to put drivers behind the wheel. They were pulled from rearguard duties and thrust into the most critical role of the day. These men endured brutal conditions. They drove shifts that often exceeded 48 hours, with only a few minutes of sleep while their trucks were refueled. The dust on French summer roads was so thick that it formed a constant fog, clogging air filters and forcing drivers to wear protective goggles. They ate their K-rations cold while driving, fighting off sleep and the deadly monotony of the road. The engineering behind the system was as crucial as the drivers. The main workhorse was the GM CCKW truck, the iconic Deuce and a Half. This 2.5-ton, six-wheel drive truck was a marvel of American mass production. Rugged and relatively easy to repair, it was the backbone. However, during Red Ball, they were routinely overloaded, carrying 5 tons or more, twice their rated capacity, putting immense strain on engines, axles, and tires. Equipment wear was astronomical. Tires were the #1 bottleneck. Bombed-out roads littered with war debris and sharp rocks destroyed tires in a matter of days. Demand for new rubber far outstripped supply. To combat this, massive tire repair centers were established along the route, where maintenance crews vulcanized and repaired tires around the clock. Without this maintenance innovation, the convoy would have ground to a halt within a week. The mechanics were the unsung heroes of the operation. They worked in makeshift open-air workshops, often in the rain and darkness. When spare parts ran out, they cannibalized broken-down trucks to keep the others running. They replaced entire engines in a matter of hours, not days. The mandate was simple: keep the wheels turning at all costs. The Red Ball Express wasn't just a driving operation. It was an emergency maintenance operation on an industrial scale. The route itself was an engineering challenge. French roads were not designed for the weight and volume of 6,000 heavy trucks per day. Bridges that were destroyed by the retreating Germans or Allied bombers quickly gave way under the relentless traffic. Army engineers, such as those from the 332nd Engineer Battalion, worked ahead of the convoys, building temporary Bailey bridges and repairing craters under constant pressure. Traffic control was another crucial innovation. Military police MPs were stationed at every intersection and in every village. They weren't just there to ensure drivers obeyed the 40-kilometer-per-hour speed limit, which was vital to preventing accidents and preserving trucks. They acted as human traffic controllers, ensuring the flow never stopped and that trucks didn't get lost on the unmarked back roads of rural France. Colonel Ayres, the little Patton of logistics, was known for his relentless presence on the route. He patrolled the circuit in his Jeep, often personally reprimanding drivers who stopped without authorization or who failed to maintain proper spacing. He understood that the crazy system would only work with absolute discipline. The idea of a one-lane highway was simple, but its execution required military coordination on a level unprecedented in road transportation. It's truly impressive to think how this logistics assembly line was implemented so quickly in the middle of a war zone. If you're enjoying this in-depth look at how engineering and organization overcame impossible challenges, please click the like button. It helps us continue to bring you these detailed behind-the-scenes stories from World War II. The drivers faced constant danger. Although the front line was advancing, the newly liberated territory was far from safe. German snipers hidden in the forests and ruined villages frequently targeted the trucks. They specifically targeted the drivers or the tires, attempting to paralyze a vehicle and create a traffic jam that would halt the entire flow of supplies. Drivers often drove with their M1 rifles within easy reach. Driving at night was particularly harrowing. The trucks used cat's eye headlights, metal covers with small slits that emitted just a glimmer of light enough to see the truck in front, but hopefully too little to be seen by enemy Luftwaffe aircraft. Navigating narrow, damaged roads with this minimal illumination while battling extreme exhaustion was a test of nerves. The craziest aspect of the plan, as the title suggests, was its complete break with military doctrine. Armies, historically, advanced at the speed of their railways. The Red Ball Express was the first time in the history of warfare that an entire field army, composed of several armored divisions, was supported almost entirely by road transport over such long distances. It was a desperate gamble on just-in-time logistics, decades before the term became common in industry. There was an inherent inefficiency that made the plan even more audacious. The GMCCCKW trucks themselves consumed enormous amounts of gasoline. It's estimated that for every 3 gallons of fuel delivered to Patton on the front lines, at least 1 gallon was consumed by a Red Ball Express truck during the round trip. It was a terrible logistical equation, but it was the only equation possible in the absence of trains. To handle the volume of fuel, innovation was necessary. In addition to dedicated tanker trucks, many general cargo trucks were loaded exclusively with jerrycans, the famous 20-liter jerrycans. The scene on the front lines was frantic. Convoys arrived, and Patton soldiers manually transferred the fuel, gallon by gallon, to their Sherman tanks, M10 tank destroyers, and other vehicles, often while still under artillery fire. While the Deuce and a Half was the unsung hero, other heavy vehicles were vital. The Diamond TM-20 tractor, for example, was a 4-ton monster used to pull flatbed trailers. These vehicles transported the heaviest supplies, such as 155 mm artillery ammunition, temporary bridges, and even damaged tanks that needed to be hauled back to repair stations. The diversity of the fleet was a maintenance challenge, but essential to the mission. The culture among Red Ball drivers was one of dark pride and exhaustion. They were aware of their importance. They knew that without them, the army would grind to a halt. They developed a sense of camaraderie despite the appalling conditions and segregation. The exhaustion was so profound that many drivers reported hallucinations, seeing ghostly figures on the dark roads or having entire conversations with passengers who weren't there. The issue of racial segregation is an indelible and complex part of this story. These African American soldiers were literally saving the Allied offensive, proving their courage and skill every day. Yet they still ate in separate mess halls, slept in segregated barracks, and faced prejudice from some of the very troops they were supplying. The Red Ball Express was a microcosm of America's racial contradictions during the war. The overwhelming success of the operation, driven largely by these segregated units, had a profound impact. Their performance provided undeniable evidence that segregation was not only morally wrong, but also militarily ineffective. The legacy of the Red Ball Express was one of the main arguments President Harry Truman used when he finally ordered the desegregation of the armed forces in 1948. Were you already aware of the complex human and social side behind the sheer logistical engineering of the Red Ball Express? It's fascinating how military necessity can collide with social structures. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, as we'd love to hear your thoughts on the dual legacy of these courageous drivers. The competition for supplies was fierce. Patton wasn't the only general in the field. To the north, British General Bernard Montgomery was also pressing for his share of the supplies for his ambitious Operation Market Garden. Eisenhower, as Supreme Commander, had to act as the final arbiter, deciding which supplies went to which army. The Red Ball Express was at the center of this high command dispute. Prioritization was brutal. Gas and ammunition always came first. Rations, though essential, often came second. There were times when Patton's troops on the front lines received a delivery of artillery shells but no food. It was a difficult tactical choice. An army can fight with hunger for a short time, but it cannot fight without bullets or fuel. The Red Ball system's success was so evident that it was replicated. Although the Normandy to Paris route is the most famous, other expresses were created as the war progressed and ports opened. The White Ball Express operated from the port of Le Havre, while the Green Diamond Express supported the advance into Belgium. This crazy idea became standard logistics doctrine. Let's revisit the headline numbers. The 12,500 tons delivered in a single day, August 29th, represents the absolute peak of the effort. The daily average over the 83 days of the operation was closer to 8,000 tons. In total, from August 25th to November 16th, 1944, the Red Ball Express transported 412,193 tons of supplies. A number that is almost impossible to visualize, but which directly translates into firepower at the front. The toll on the truck fleet was terrible. Preventative maintenance, essential to the longevity of any vehicle, was completely abandoned in favor of operational speed. Engines were run to failure, brakes were worn down to the metal, and transmissions failed. By the end of the operation in November, the vast majority of the 6,000 trucks were completely worn out, destined for the scrapyard. They were sacrificed on the pyre of logistics. The human toll was also high. In addition to chronic exhaustion that led to countless accidents, drivers faced constant danger from the enemy. Exact statistics are difficult to come by, but many drivers were killed or injured, not only by sniper fire or landmines, but also by accidents caused by driving overloaded vehicles on inadequate roads, often falling asleep at the wheel. The genius of Ayers and his team's crazy idea was its forced simplicity. The one-way circuit eliminated the biggest logistical problem: congestion. Absolute priority eliminated bureaucracy, and 24/7's operation maximized the use of every asset. It was the application of mass production principles like an industrial assembly line, but instead of cars, it produced miles of progress. The comparison with the German logistical effort is striking. The Wehrmacht relied heavily on rail transport. When its railways were destroyed by the French resistance and Allied bombers, its ability to supply its troops collapsed. Furthermore, the German army still relied on hundreds of thousands of horses for transportation. The Allied victory in France was largely a victory of the internal combustion engine over the horse. There came a time when even the Red Ball Express wasn't enough. In early September, near the Moselle River, Patton's Third Army stalled. He famously complained that Eisenhower and Montgomery were holding up his supplies. The truth was more complex. The army had simply advanced too quickly. Logistics, even the crazy Red Ball system, had reached its physical limit. Recognition for the drivers came slowly. At the time, they were seen as rearguard personnel. But the generals in the field, including Patton, knew the truth. Patton, though impatient, acknowledged in his dispatches that his army was advancing on the gasoline and bullets delivered by these men. They were the tip of the logistics spear, and without them, the tip of the combat spear was blunt. So, who is the truck driver of the title? It's not a single man. The truck driver is the system, the audacious idea. It's Colonel Ayers insisting on discipline. It's the mechanic working feverishly in the darkness. And, above all, it's the anonymous African-American soldier, like William Perry, fighting sleep, and fear to keep his deuce and a half on the road, knowing that the fate of the war rested in his cargo. Each of these 6,000 trucks represents a story of courage and ingenuity. It's fascinating to see how technology and human factors intertwine. If you'd like to see more in-depth analyses of the engineering, both mechanical and human, that decided the fate of battles, consider supporting the channel. Your engagement allows us to continue this journey through military history. The climax of Operation Red Ball Express occurred in those frantic weeks between late August and early September 1944. The Falaise pocket had closed, annihilating much of the German army in France. Paris was liberated. Patton was racing toward the German border. The Red Ball Express was the only artery pumping the blood, the fuel, for this historic offensive. Every delivery was critical. The tension was palpable at Allied headquarters. Every report from Patton was a desperate plea for more fuel. Every report from Convoy was a warning that the trucks were failing, that the tires were wearing thin. The crazy idea was being stretched to its breaking point. Drivers were literally fainting at the wheel. It was a race against time and the limits of human and mechanical endurance. And then the result became clear. It worked against all odds. The Red Ball Express kept the Allied armies moving during the most critical 83 days of the French campaign. It didn't win the war single-handedly, but it provided the margin of victory, allowing the Allies to exploit the German collapse before they could establish a new defensive line. It put Patton on the German border months ahead of schedule. The resolution came not with an abrupt halt, but with a planned transition. On November 16, 1944, the operation was officially terminated. By this time, Allied engineers had accomplished another miracle: the reconstruction of the French railways and, crucially, the opening of the deep-water port of Antwerp, Belgium. Rail transport, slower but much more efficient in volume, could finally take over the load. The legacy of the Red Ball Express redefined modern warfare. It proved that a purely road-based logistical task force, if managed with iron discipline and ingenuity, could supply entire mechanized armies on a continental scale. The lessons of traffic management, field maintenance, and continuous operations became the foundation of military logistics doctrine that is still used today in conflicts around the world. The social legacy, as mentioned, was equally profound. The exemplary performance of African American drivers was one of the clearest and most public proofs of the fallacy of segregation. It was impossible for the military command to ignore that, in its hour of greatest need, it was these men who saved the campaign's logistics. The Red Ball Express was a vital step, forged in the fire of necessity, toward racial integration in the armed forces. The crazy train of the title, then, wasn't crazy. It was visionary. It was a feat of human and mechanical engineering, a noisy, dirty symphony of 6,000 GMC trucks, overworked engines, and determined men. It was definitive proof that generals may draw up plans, but it is logisticians, engineers, and drivers who win wars. Patton's story is incomplete without the story of the Red Ball Express. The story of the Red Ball Express is a powerful reminder that behind every armored advance lies an invisible supply chain, maintained by sheer courage and engineering. What do you think was the most impressive element of this operation? The audacity of the plan, the resilience of the machines, or the determination of the drivers? Leave your final thoughts in the comments and let's continue this conversation.